Hello everyone and welcome to the new rebooted Ask Ethys, where I answer all of your lore questions about Final Fantasy XIV to the best of my knowledge and my ability. I've been drawing all of our questions today from our patrons and subs Discord channel, so if you would like to submit a question to be considered for a future episode, then check the links in the description below and you will find out how you might go about doing that. Now, to kick us off, we've got a couple of questions here about Midgardsormr and the First Brood. So I think we're going to start with that. We've got a question from Duskwight, and we've got a question from Kaz and Whitewind that are largely overlapping. So I think I'll be able to hit both of these in answering Duskwight, who asks, I've always been curious to hear your thoughts on the entire First Brood as a whole, i.e. the place they came from, if they could rival the Ancients, etc. Now, the second part of that question is very interesting to me, and I think I understand what Duskwight is getting at in asking that. But we'll start from the beginning. Now, the First Brood, of course, refers to the 7 great worms: Bahamut, Tiamat, Nidhogg, Hraesvelgr, Vertra, Azdaja, and did I say Ratatoska? 7 great worms. Their father, Midgardsormr, is not from Hydaelyn. He is from another planet, which we refer to as the Dragon Star. The Ishgardians study it. They're astrologians. Keep an eye on it because they actually use it to predict the movements of the Dravanian Horde, because there seems to be some remaining inextricable link between that planet and the progeny of Midgardsormr. But basically, the Dragon Star was attacked by the alien race that created Omega. We know nothing about them other than that they created Omega. They attacked the Dragon Star. They basically annihilated it. They didn't destroy it because it's still there, but they burned it real good. And Midgardsormr had a final stand against Omega, which he just narrowly won insofar as he managed to temporarily disable Omega, grab his clutch of 7 eggs, and run far, far away. It took him about 1,000 years to reach our world, to reach Hydaelyn, when, as far as we know, Hydaelyn was still young, which I think we can take to mean was that it happened shortly after the Sundering. So perhaps, somewhere around 12 to 10,000 years ago. And Hydaelyn basically agreed to allow Midgardsormr to settle on the source and raise his brood there on the condition that, one, he would defend her when Omega inevitably came knocking, and 2, that he would defend Silvertear. And we'll come to Silvertear in a little bit because we've got a question about Silvertear as well. As for whether or not they could rival the Ancients, that depends on whether or not Midgardsormr was sundered. Now, to explain that, we know that the Sundering affected everything on our planet, cut it into 14 shards, and as Emmett Selk says, basically, everyone was 1/14 the power level, the ethereal density that they previously were before the Sundering. So the question of whether or not Midgardsormr and subsequently the First Brood could rival the Ancients in power is really a question of whether or not they are sundered, whether or not the Dragon Star is part of the space, the space of Hydaelyn, the space surrounding the source, whether or not there is space outside of the shards in the Final Fantasy XIV cosmology. Now, I would say yes. I would say yes, there is space outside, and yes, the Dragon Star is part of that, and yes, subsequently, Midgardsormr is unsundered, because it makes sense. Midgardsormr is incredibly powerful, and when he comes to the source, his children are slightly less powerful, and their children are slightly less powerful, and so on and so on and so on, until you get down to basically like biasts and, regular scalekin, effectively, that are not particularly intelligent, not particularly powerful. We know that dragons become more powerful as they age, but there is also a confirmed association between basically their generational removal from Midgardsormr. And it would make sense. The source having less ether than an unsundered planet means there's less ether to go into new life. There's less ether for dragons to absorb over time. It makes sense to me. However, in 2018, at the FanFest that immediately preceded Shadowbringers, Koji Fox sat down with Anonymous and Fusion X from Gamerescape. Shout out to Gamerescape for having a backlog of about 10 years of interviews with Koji Fox, which you guys can access, and I'll try and put a link in the description below to an archive of those for you, because they're all fantastic to read through. Let me find it here. Yeah, so Anonymous is asking, is the Dragon Star part of the Source's universe, or is it a different universe? What about the Dragon Star? Does it also split into 13? Do all planets split into 13? And to that, Koji says he doesn't know. He says it's something they haven't confirmed. He says he'd like to think so at that point in 2018, but it's basically something that was undecided at that point between him and Oda-san. It seems that coming into Shadowbringers, they were still working out how the cosmology of Final Fantasy XIV worked. So we don't know. We don't know whether or not Midgardsormr was sundered, and therefore we cannot say for certain whether or not he's more powerful than a unsundered Ascian. But I would speculate, if I were going to put my guess out there into the ether, I would say that we are going to find out eventually that he is unsundered. Now, this question leads pretty directly into one about Silvertear. Parsfall says, I still don't understand this thing about something being in Silvertear Lake. Now, as I mentioned with the last question, Midgardsormr was tasked by Hydaelyn to defend Silvertear as part of their pact, part of their agreement, part of their condition for him and his brood being allowed to stay on the Source. Now, we're talking about Silvertear a little bit more recently because some of us are suspecting that it might have some connection to the keening, to the apocalypse that befell ancient Amarot. But this is, of course, a remnant of 1.0. So to take it back to there, I'm sure most of you guys have seen the opening cinematic for 1.0, where the Agrius invades Mordona, and you have the Battle of Silvertear Skies. The Dravanian Horde is called to intervene against the Garlean fleet, and Midgardsormr attacks the Agrius, and they fall together into Silvertear, and with this massive explosion of light, we see the spirits of the original primals all come flying out. We are back after some brief technical difficulties, and we have our new special guest, Koji, who is being very sooky after he was neutered yesterday and needs some special attention. Now let me see if I can regain my train of thought. We were talking about the 1.0 CGI trailer cinematic. Yes, and there are two important things to note about that. The first thing is that whole trailer is framed as a echo vision of the protagonist, of our baby-faced 1.0 Shardbit. And the second thing is that, of course, we need to keep in mind that these trailer cinematics are never literal representations of what canonically happens in the game. If you guys remember, the most obvious example is, of course, Heaven's Ward, and the cinematic trailer there basically showing hundreds of red-hued Hraxvelgers attacking Ishgard, which of course never actually happens. Now, I make this point because the question on everyone's mind basically since that time is, when we see the primals flying out of Silvertear, when this seal is broken, is that literal or is it metaphorical? And in fact, I think it was in 2015, another Gamerescape interview with Koji Fox raised this point, and he implied that the questions of Silvertear and of Midgardsormr and what he was doing there, and what's really underneath Silvertear was going to be answered in Heavensward. And it kind of was and wasn't. We know from Heavensward that Silvertear is basically the ethereal heart of Hydaelyn. If you think of Hydaelyn as an organism with ethereal veins and arteries, the major one of these, the heart, is at Silvertear, is under Silvertear. And part of Midgardsormr's agreement with Hydaelyn was to protect this source, the source. When the seal was broken, there was this incredible explosion of ether that very soon after began to coalesce as this massive abundance of ether crystals that we're used to seeing everywhere in Eorzea from A Realm Reborn and onwards. Now, before this happened, it was very, very difficult to summon a primal. As in Othard, as we saw in Stormblood, you would need a special relic or artifact that contained an abundance of ether in order to summon a primal, whereas after the Battle of Silvertear, you can just shovel up some ether crystals from pretty much anywhere in Eorzea and summon a primal. So my speculation, my guess, is that this scene is metaphorical. That said, Koji has implied that there are still things that we don't know about Silvertear, and he did make it clear and specific that it wasn't just a power under there, but a presence. And to me, at least, presence implies consciousness, implies intelligence, and with the way that they've been trying to tie in all of these dangling 1.0 threads, which, to be fair, were no doubt intended to go in very, very different directions before Yoshida took over, the way they're tying them into Shadowbringers, I would not be surprised if there is a connection between the presence under Silvertear and the keening, the sound, the source of whatever that noise was that caused the Amratine apocalypse and made everyone lose control of their creation magics. And maybe I'm dating this video because we're going to be learning a lot about that in 5.5 and moving into 6.0, but interesting discussion nonetheless. Now, we've been talking about dragons and we've been doing a lot of speculation here, so I would like to move away from that to a question that Level 39 Nerd has here. As I just did the Stormblood Allied Beast Tribe quests, do we know where the other Seeker tribes have their home apart from the O and M tribe? Miqo'te seem to be unknown in Kugane at least, so where are them kitties? So the Miqo'te are basically to Eorzea what the Aurar are to Othard. They are, as far as we know, historically native to Eorzea, and it was when the Allagan Empire expanded and took over all of Aldenard that they were pushed into southern Ilzabad for the most part. Places like Bozja and what would become Werlet. Now later, during the 5th Umbral Era, the Age of Endless Frost, they migrated south back into Eorzea in search of fresh hunting grounds, in search of warmer climes, and largely settled in Ablathia's Spine. The descendants of those that stayed in Ablathia's Spine would come to be known as the Seekers of the Sun. After the floodwaters of the 6th Umbral Era receded, the majority of them migrated further south into Thanalan, and many of the clans are in the Sogoli Desert. You're quite right that the M tribe and the J tribe, I believe, remained in Girabanya, and there are probably a few more scattered around Ablathia's Spine. But a couple of things you need to remember here. Firstly is that there are large parts of Eorzea that we haven't explored. The Sogoli Desert, for instance, we encounter one tribe of Miqo'te there, but we only get to explore like just the tip of that desert, and there are no doubt a number of tribes there. And same thing with the Ablathia's Spine. We get to explore Girabanya, and we get to explore basically the other extreme edge of it with Dravanya, but there is a massive, massive, massive span of Ablathia's Spine that we've never seen. We see some of it with Zelfatol. as well, of course. But there are huge, as yet uncharted, at least to us, territories in there, where I might add the Hellsguard Rogaden come from as well. The other thing you need to remember is that although the player population certainly doesn't reflect it, canonically, Miqo'te are a very small population. Even in cities where they are prolific and common, they make up an absolute minority of the racial distribution. So while they are a relatively common sight in Eorzea, they are not half as common as the player base might make them appear. And as you have noticed, they are a very, very rare sight the further east you get, in the same way that Al-Ra are canonically a very rare sight in Eorzea. Now, Aisling asks a related question here about what lore and knowledge we have about the Keepers of the Moon Miqo'te, as well as the Duskwight. And to that, I would say, once again, you need to keep in mind that players' races does not reflect the canonical racial distribution of these places, and we don't know very much about either of these clans because they are very, very small clans. The Keepers of the Moon are, of course, mostly in the Twelves Wood, and mostly a part of Gridania now, but before the establishment of Gridania were semi-nomadic hunters, and unlike the Seekers of the Sun, were relatively solitary. As for the Duskwight ironically only came to be a distinct clan after the establishment of Gridania, where 90% of Gelmora's population abandoned that city to establish Gelmora. So they are a very, very, very small number of Elezen that still live either in the ruins of Gelmora or in other parts of the forest outside of Gridania and outside of the protection of the elementals. Of course, I've been saying for a long, long time that I want to learn more about the Duskwight and I want to learn more about Gelmora, but we have to keep in mind that compared to a lot of the cultures that we have been spending a lot of time with, they are a minuscule population. Of course, shout out to my boy Vidorlin. Now, since we're talking about the clans of the spoken races, I'm going to take just one more question here. I think we've got time for one more. Rinny asks, did the Raen and Xaela used to live together on the Azim Steppe before the Raen decided to peace out and head to Suinosato/Hingashi? The short answer for that is yes. According to Al-Ra legends, the Raen and Xaela are both originally from the Azim Steppe. As we know from hanging out with the Xaela so much in Stormblood, the Xaela consider themselves to be the children of Namar, the Dusk Mother, and the Raen of Azim, the Dawn Father. Namar and Azim did not always get along. They fought viciously, as did their children, before they settled things between them, and the Raen migrated out of the steppe, mostly to Yanksha and Hingashi, although we now know that a fair number of them ended up in Wurlit. And as Rinny has observed, yes, the Xaela decided to remain on what they consider their ancestral lands, the Azim Steppe. Now, we've got many more excellent questions here that I would love to get to. Fenchan's asking about the Lambs of Dalamud. Kazan is asking about past Warriors of Light, about iterations of the Echo, about Eureka, and a concrete account of the Eureka incident. This is stuff that I will definitely be getting to in subsequent parts. So thank you very much for asking those questions, and do please keep them coming. Now, if you would like to submit some questions to be considered for future episodes of this series, I've been taking questions from our Discord server, specifically the patrons and Twitch subs channel. So if you fall into either one of those categories, then go ahead and drop a question there. And if you don't fall into either one of those categories, then you can perhaps consider getting aboard with that, with some links in the description below. I'd also like to give a shout out to Pascalus for the use of his tasty lo-fi Shadowbringers remixes, which I'm sure you guys have been enjoying in the background. You'll find a link to his YouTube and his SoundCloud in the description below as well. He's definitely an artist to keep an eye on. He's assured me that he's got some more tracks coming down the pipeline. So if you would like to support his work and perhaps encourage him to continue making these mixes, then you might even consider chucking him a couple of dollars in his coffee, which I believe is linked in his Twitter and YouTube as well. So that's all we have for this first episode of Ask Ethys. Please let me know what you think, if you would like to see more of this, if you have anything you would like to see from this series. And of course, if you would like to see more, then do please make sure that you have hit the subscribe button and just giving that bell a gentle little flick so that you get some notifications when these come up again. Until next time, thank you all so much for watching and take care.